our usual dedication of offerings and the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. So I'll share the screen. To the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, we render with offerings our rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and Blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sangham saranang gacchami, Ditiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Ditiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Ditiyampi Sangham saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranang gacchami. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinadana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kame Sumichachara Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavada Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Sura Miriyanajja Pamadatana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani Pancha Sikkhavadani Silena Sugatiyanti Silena Bhoga Sampada Silena Nibhutinyanti Tasma Sila Visodhaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is the source of happiness. Virtue is the source of true wealth. Virtue is the source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So in meditation, I encourage us to find our own path, our own practice, our own way, our own intuitive understanding and the path of self-discovery, the path of discovery by oneself of one's own experience. And this means that sometimes and often other people's experience is not necessarily helpful. It's okay to listen to what a teacher says, but not to believe it. That's not helpful. But just to hold it gently as a path of inquiry that teacher might encourage, but not something to hold tightly, just lightly. We have to develop our own trust, our own confidence, and through our own experience. For me, meditation seems like a continual focusing and stepping back from focusing almost at the same time. You bring your attention to one point, but you're continually stepping back from that and opening your awareness. And the two are not compatible. So it's often the case where we let's at first focus more to calm the mind, to still the mind. And then later we step back from that focus so that we can open to our experience in a broader way. The two things aren't compatible. You can't do them simultaneously, but you can perhaps do them. They can be self-supporting, nevertheless. So we bring our attention to one point, but with our intention, our sense of direction is to relinquish, to let go, to step back, rather than to do that practice of one-pointedness for its own sake, as though we were going to achieve or attain something. So it's a combination of moving towards and letting go, stepping back, in other words. Finding that confidence to not prejudge what our experience will be. That is not like a path of non-interference. So we observe our experience without telling it how it should be. And this is a very important aspect of meditation. We're not telling ourselves what we can expect to experience, or trying to achieve some predetermined idea, but to open up to experience as it is. Deliberately not try to experience something that we've conceptualized. Like our experience, our meditation should be like a small child exploring a garden with a sense of wonder, not knowing, we need to know the names of the flowers. It's okay to not know. Deliberately not knowing can be very helpful to encourage that investigation of what there is. So that beginning of our sitting practice is often helped, supported by the development of an upright posture. Bringing our attention to the body is a way of calming the mind. And discovering an upright posture is a point of reference that we can return to, that can help us when we lose that posture, that point of balance, when our bodies are out of balance, then that's telling us something. If we notice that, we can notice the state of mind. Returning to the upright posture is a way of returning to that point of balance with the mind, a point of sustained awareness. Waking up, you might say. So the beginning of our meditation is all about waking up to the body, waking up to our experience. as we begin to calm down, the mind begins to find a natural point of focus, or just a general sense of awareness. It might be possible to focus on a point of not knowing, point of emptiness, simple awareness, or without determining any mental content to it, stepping back from the busy mind and resting in the space that follows when we let go. Letting that be your point of focus. Still, quiet mind. It's okay to rest there. We don't need to make anything out of it. Whatever our point of focus, wherever it might be, the object itself isn't important, but the opportunity it gives is to let go of the distractions, the busyness of the mind, the sense of doing, for example. Letting go of the grasping mind. Whenever we notice that grasping, pushing away, we step back. We don't need to create or make anything out of our experience, but just to be present is enough. To have the courage not to interfere, but to trust in your ability to notice, to be aware, to simply observe. You don't need to make it different or interfere in any way. to make it into anything. That it isn't just to observe is enough. I'm trying to develop that confidence that it's okay, whatever it is. It'll pass, it'll arise and cease if we just let it be. We don't need to interfere with our experience, but we don't need to believe it either. Just let it flow. Observing doesn't mean believing. Noticing isn't buying into our experience. Doesn't matter. Just having that confidence, that courage to allow things in and to allow the things which arise to cease, to pass by, to let them go. It's okay. There's nothing to hold on to, but nothing to resist. So it's a path of not judging. We don't need to have preferences. We don't need to have an opinion. Like a good and kind and gentle parent observes a child at play, we don't need to interfere. We don't need to have an opinion, not to judge. Just to let them be and grow and learn and trust and discover the world for themselves. Having a kindly and gentle, loving way of just being present. Ding. 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 So I hope that I'll say a few words and that you'll ask some questions or make your own observations and reflections. So that you can do that just by unmuting. So what came to my mind just now was that the Buddha emphasized are a path of understanding when we're creating suffering. And his teaching was primarily about understanding that rather than focusing on some sort of blissful experience that we might call enlightenment. He didn't talk much about it because that's and you can see that. I don't know if you've noticed in my experience when I hear people talking about sublime states and refined meditative experiences, and I can't. Either you haven't experienced those things and you connect and relate to them, or you haven't, and in which case you don't connect and relate to them. But neither way do they really teach you anything. And so we learn from people who talk about their path to that realization, don't we? Not from the realization itself. So then how that is that in our practice, in our meditation, our path of meditation practice, is what we're doing is noticing the mind which grasps, the mind which is connecting to greed, hatred, and delusion, and how that arises, and the suffering that causes. So the benefit of our meditation practice is to be able to see that more clearly. That's why we meditate, really, not to experience blissful meditative experiences, but to understand what takes us away from the blissful natural state of the mind and how that happens. Because when we understand that, when we stop creating suffering, and when we stop creating suffering, then there's nothing to worry about, nothing to fix. So we don't need to focus on in absence of suffering. It's the suffering itself. That's where we give our attention to understand how that arises. I often think that actually when we're better physically, let's say we've been poorly, we've had COVID, but when we're better, we're not that bothered anymore. When we've got COVID, when we're suffering, we're very interested in that experience. But the experience of being better doesn't grab our attention much. We don't notice that much. It's not that interesting. And we don't learn very much from it. But we learn a lot from not being well and understanding why and how and our experience of that. So I think that's perhaps similar with dukkha. The ending of dukkha is not very interesting. But the experience of dukkha is very interesting. There's a lot to learn from. When we get to the end of dukkha, it really doesn't matter, whether, who cares? It's not a problem. So there's nothing much to talk about. But the experience of dukkha and how it arises, that's really interesting. So even when we've been practicing for a long time, then we're still going to experience dukkha. We can still experience dukkha and understand. Perhaps we have a more greater clarity, so that when we notice the grasping mind arising, then we see more clearly how dukkha arises. We see it more clearly. So, for example, I was I couldn't find something. I was looking for something. We're going to go away on holiday. I was looking for my over trousers. We're going to Scotland, and it's quite likely to rain. But where were they? I couldn't find them anywhere. And I was looking through the bag, and I couldn't find them. And I found a bag which looked a bit like they might have been my over trousers. And I started to look inside, but my wife came along. She says, "They're my over trousers." And I felt, oh, I was only looking, I didn't mean I wasn't stealing your over trousers. I was only looking to see, and I discovered when I looked in that they clearly weren't my over trousers. But that feeling of, I felt, oh, I've been, I kind of felt like a little tantrum came up, oh, why do you have to interfere? Why can't you just let me? I was playing my own little game here, like I was talking about the little child happily playing with opening this little bag, looking inside, see what it was. And then my wife comes along and tells me off. No, they're mine. Leave them alone. They're not yours. And so I felt like, oh, stop interfering. So I said that. I said, oh, stop interfering. Leave me alone. I had that little tantrum. And then I thought afterwards, oh, this is the cause of suffering. This is where suffering arises, how we get upset with each other. And in that moment, there's not a lot of love, is there? You feel like this person's a real, go away, leave me alone. And then you realize how that's foolish, how there's a greed, hate, and delusion. You can see that foolishness, that attachment and the aversion very clearly. And then the pain, the suffering of that is very apparent, because it's only a pair of over trousers, for goodness sake, and there are more, yet in that moment you suddenly hate somebody who you shouldn't be hating. There's no reason, it's only a pair of over trousers. But the frustration of not being able to find my over trousers and her interfering, saying that, I have felt that little tantrum. So I had my little tantrum, and then I kind of got back to things back into her perspective, and I went and apologized, and she apologized to me. And then you feel, oh, everything's all right again, and that's great. But nevertheless, it's a glimpse, isn't it? It's an experience of dukkha. And what happened was, we went for a walk, and we were talking about these over trousers and where could they be. And it occurred to us both, really, that we probably, it's just possible that we put them inside a pair of Wellingtons. And when I went back after the walk and looked, I found them there. They were inside the Wellingtons. So of course, we found, that was the end of the trauma. Found reunited with the over trousers. But it's just an example of how we can create suffering. and how it arises. It's really interesting, isn't it? That how it comes out of greed and hate and delusion. You know, they're my, no, they're my overtrust. No, they're not. Well, you know, that kind of attachment to a sense of who's, you know, who cares? But that's what in that moment that we bring a sense of me and mine, and that dukkha, that's a loss of an absence of love, isn't it? When that breaks, that relationship is hurt, damaged. But then it can be mended. It's okay. We can mend it, but we can mend relationships when we accept the our mistake, and we say we're sorry, don't we? And that's how we mend relationships, because the other person understands too. They see that they were a part of that that suffering. They were it wasn't just, you know, it was a mutual experience and something which can be understood. When we understand, then there's a healing happens, and then we get on. It's finished. It's finished, because, and that's important, because when we lay things, when we allow things to be properly closed, like you get closure. Talk about closure. You hug each other. You make things better, and that's closure, isn't it? Everything's fine, and that's how it is with life. That's what it should be like. We're not, if we leave things without seeing them clearly, we don't get to that closure. We hold on to grudges. We don't forgive, and we don't understand. We still think it's the other person. They interfered. We blame other people for our own foolishness. So then, to see that as a nice example of how suffering arises, dukkha arises, yet it can also cease. It can also be allowed to cease. And when we see, the ceasing of it comes about from letting go of our attachment, letting go of our aversion, letting go of that sense of self-identity, me and mine, separation, that sense of separation from another person. And that's a very beautiful thing. So in a way, we could say, well, there's nothing wrong with dukkha, because there's an end, there's an end to it. So it's okay. We don't mind. It's okay to suffer. It's okay to even greed, hate, and delusion is not really a problem, because when it arises, if we can understand it and recognize it, and if we don't believe in the things, the stories that we tell ourselves, and the foolishness of our trauma, if we can see it as a little tantrum, then we understand it well enough. It don't really create, it's not a lasting suffering, it's a temporary thing that comes and goes. And actually, funnily enough, you can feel fonder of people, can't you? I don't know if you know what I mean, but if it's like if we never fell out, we'd never make up. It's like that. And so there's somehow you value people more when you lose them, because in that moment you've lost the damage, the relationship broken, and so that sense of coming back together and making up, that's a very beautiful experience that is not something which would have happened if it hadn't have been for that silliness, foolishness, that dukkha arising. So in a way, you could say we shouldn't be frightened of dukkha. There's nothing to worry about, nothing to be frightened of, you shouldn't really be frightened of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's okay, because if we can notice it and allow it to run its course to closure based on understanding, then we've nothing to be frightened of. And that's wonderful, because if we were frightened of dukkha, we couldn't just live our lives. I know you might think, oh, if you were, you can have an idealistic notion of living life must be, the perfect life would be one of somebody who's enlightened and then would never suffer. They'd never ever have all their relationships would be perfect. They'd never upset anyone, and nobody would ever upset them. And yet, I don't think life has to be that way. I think it's okay to live life, but I think living life can be more about fearlessness and courage, and not be frightened of making mistakes, and not be frightened of saying the wrong thing and upsetting people, because you can mend it, you can put it right. You can't always, you can't get through life without making silly mistakes. I remember recently I made a mistake on a spreadsheet, and the person, to provide some information to somebody, they had been so deliberate and careful about every small pound that this spreadsheet represented, and they had felt that they knew, like it gave them they needed that confidence that this was right. So I helped them and prepared this spreadsheet, and they explained it to a body of trust, the body of trustees. This is the English Sangha Trust, and the trustees all agreed, and we all decided on something, and that was great. And then afterwards, I realised I found a mistake of £200,000 on this spreadsheet. So I had to say, well, I think that's not right. I've made a mistake, and I didn't know how it had happened. I couldn't understand, because we spent so much time and care about making sure it was right. And then I traced it back through various previous versions, and I spotted how the mistake occurred. And then I realized, oh, well, it had been there for quite a while and we hadn't noticed. We'd just hadn't realized. And it was just one of those things I had to explain. So I first of all pointed out this mistake and said that was wrong. And then I said that I was sorry, and that how it, that it had happened, not just in the last version, but in the few versions earlier, that had actually been there for some time. And we'd been under the misapprehension that these numbers were right. But the good thing was, it would have made no difference to the decisions we made. The decisions were just the same. Whether £200,000 would have made no difference to that. And I said that was a good thing. That although the mistake you could say was a bad thing, but it made no difference. So that was nice. And I noticed I didn't feel bad about it. It didn't worry me, because these things happen. I've made lots of mistakes over the years, and this is just another. And you can't avoid it. It's inevitable. I've made massive mistakes, far bigger mistakes than that. And they've always been fine in the end. What can you do? So these things, in a way we can notice that kind of feeling of, oh no, but when we understand, we don't create a lot of suffering out of it. Even if there's maybe a bit of dukkha arises with our, oh no, feeling, it doesn't last. And we can talk it through with people and say, oh, I made a mistake. And it's not a feeling of a terrible thing happened, but just a natural thing. These things happen, and everything's fine. And so anyway, I want to encourage you to ask questions. Otherwise, I'm going to just talk. Susan. Oh, can you not unmute? Maybe Wendy needs to be able.
You can unmute now. You can.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting what you say about making mistakes and the dukkha that can arise from that. And very often dukkha arises from trivial things rather than really, really serious things. But also, in my experience, when you've been able to meditate and can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. It's not just that you are able to say, I'm sorry, and not to get too worried about it. But it's also that if you get a very bad reaction, which does happen, people can get very, very upset, and they don't have your ability to look at things with more equanimity. Then this equanimity that you've developed can also help you, even when the reaction is very, very strong against that mistake. And I found that has been very, very useful. And going back to an earlier point of yours, that in the early days when I was meditating and looking for bliss, and occasionally experiencing it, but it was always very fleeting. And over the course of time, I found that actually it's not so much the bliss, but it's gaining this equanimity that enables you to deal with the small situations and the dukkha of everyday life that is really most valuable. And thank you very much for sharing your experience about that, about the overtrousers and the mistake on the spreadsheet. I totally sympathize with that. But you have pretty understanding people opposite you, I think.
I know, but I think that partly it's our courage to and confidence. I don't know how it works. If we accept things ourselves, then we create more of an atmosphere of acceptance that other people kind of mirror or feed on that. But if we go to somebody and say, oh, this is terrible disaster that's happened, I made this awful mistake, what a terrible, hopeless person I am, well, they're more likely to be critical, I think, because you're being self-critical. So I think that, yeah.
But also, if you don't put up the resistance to an angry reaction, then you are actually diffusing the situation, because the other person will realize that there's not much point in going on and on because you're not really reacting to it. So you're not pouring petrol onto the flames, or whatever the expression is. Yeah. So it's valuable lessons. Yes.
You get some very, very extreme reactions from people. I do agree. And they, then that we need to bring our skills of listening to those. It's a very interesting experience, very interesting when that happens, because listening and not and acknowledging, what we need to do is acknowledge that people feel the way they feel, but we don't have to agree with them. And so finding that balance of genuinely acknowledging that the people's feeling, because they're feeling very angry or upset with you, and we need to acknowledge that, but we don't necessarily have to agree that what they find the fault that they're finding is necessarily true. We can still say, no, I don't agree. It's not that your perception, like recently I had to say, I can acknowledge that you feel the way you do, but your perception of what's happened isn't correct. And so I was able to explain that.
Yes.
And I think that was fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm very interested, Martin, in this area. It really does strike a chord with me personally, and thank you for the teaching around it. The area that I personally have difficulty is around a more generalized anxiety about, for example, speaking up in a group like this and perhaps coming over as being unwise or unskillful or silly. So where I'm at here is, I think it's around like a narrative, a story that I've got about myself, that I'm not very good at speaking in a group, and therefore habitually what I do is not speak in groups. I hold back. And it's interesting that you use the word courage, because I think a lot of it's about that, isn't it? It's about trying to be brave enough, as I'm trying to be now, just to speak, just to try and address it sort of head on, really. And well, that's what I've got to say anyway for the moment.
Yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway is the title of the book, isn't it? Yeah, it's a very good one. It is the right way to be. I remember meeting somebody who attended a retreat, and they were with me, and they had been in a small discussion group with a group of people, and one of the women in the group were very insistent on trying to get them to say something, but they didn't want to speak. And so I felt sorry for him, and afterwards I spoke to him and I said I was sorry that he was put in that position, because it wasn't meant to be like that. It wasn't meant to be an obligation to speak. It was to be in the group. It was simply okay. It was absolutely fine not to say anything. And he shouldn't have been put in that position. But he then went on to tell me that he hardly said anything ever, that he was married. And I said, how do you manage in a married relationship with, if you don't ever speak up, say anything? And he said, it's not easy. And he really had a problem, and it came back when he talked to me about his childhood, that he felt safer saying nothing, because as a child, whatever he said, he felt was wrong. He was always told that whenever he spoke, it was wrong. So he decided to say nothing, and he was still the same, even as an adult, still holding on to that same mechanism, of that self-defense mechanism. Of course, that's not good. It's something which I hope the only way out of it, isn't it, is to feel the fear and do it anyway, because you've got to start speaking. You've got to start speaking sooner or later. Otherwise, you just hide forever. And it's good. It's really good for you. That's why one thing I did think was, the last thing that person needed to do was go on a silent retreat. But really, they could have done just the opposite. They would have just what they needed was a talking retreat. I think it's very. I'm like you. I was very reluctant to say anything, and nervous, and felt like I had nothing to say. That's another thing. So what I've got to talk about, everyone else seems to have all these wonderful things to say. What have I got to say? But eventually I found that courage just came out of meditation practice, really, by looking at it, investigating, what is it that and why? This fear is fear. I think our meditation practice is primarily about looking at fear. That's what we do, and that's why I was encouraging this practice of not interfering, to have the courage to allow things to be as they are and to notice them without telling ourselves that what we experience, it shouldn't be like this, or it should be something else. Because that habit of interfering and trying to say that it shouldn't be like this and trying to make it something different is just another way of hiding from the way it is. And actually having the courage to be with how it is a way eventually of overcoming fear, because it's not, we get out of the habit of running away. We have to just keep on turning and facing. Our habit becomes one to turn and face, and to receive and be an embrace really in what our experience, whatever we're hiding from, Yeah, and that's wonderful, because it's what it takes a lot of loving kindness, because when we're hiding from we're hiding from all those hidden little selves, the selves that we pushed away and we hid. We wouldn't let come out because it's like we've taken on the role of parent, and these are embarrassing little selves of these little children in us that we don't want to admit are there, and they shouldn't be like that. So we keep pushing them away, and we never let them come out and play. So we never give them a space to just exist, to be present. And if you can let these little sillinesses in the mind, in our hearts, the things that we've hidden away, we think they're silly, but actually they all have something to teach us, and they're not really silly. They just need the space to come out and be present, and there's nothing there. But as long as we hide and push them away, then they have a power. So, yeah.
Thank you.
It's useful. There's an interesting journey. I think to do that. So that's why I think this kind of path of non-interference is good, because it really encourages us to bear with. It's often about bearing with and surrendering to practice, where it's not the way, it shouldn't be this way, but that's allowing it to be this way. It's fine. Because whoever said it shouldn't be this way, when you listen to that inner voice, it's not who you are, it's somebody else. You think that, who is it that's telling me that it shouldn't be this way? It's a voice I've learned from. It's actually my mother telling me this. It's my father, my first boss, or my teacher. It's somebody else that's telling me this. It's not. Just let it go. Stop believing in it. Susan.
Yes, a lot of of your meditation, of your guided meditation, was about this, and I was thinking, actually, it sounds very simple the way you say it. Sounds very nice, stepping back and so on, and observing and letting everything go. But actually, it's probably the most difficult thing, isn't it? Because when you can follow your breath, and that's relatively easy, but actually just stepping back and letting go and observing. I mean, you're observing thoughts and reactions, I expect you mean that, and that is really the core of it, and that is what is very difficult. And that is what in the end helps most with life's experiences, as you've been saying. But it is difficult. It's not easy.
It isn't that difficult, because I think what's perhaps difficult, or what we make difficult, is our attachment to it should be otherwise. Basically, that's what we make difficult. So when we think meditation shouldn't be this way, it shouldn't be like this, it's quite hard, because we're pushing away the way it is. We keep pushing away and pushing it away in order to attain, or to get something of the idea of how it should be. And that is difficult. We're making life difficult when we do that. But actually allowing it to be the way it is easy. It's not that difficult.
I'll try it like that. That approach.
It's just that it's not the way we want it to be. So that's what's, it's our preferences that make life difficult. But allowing it to be the way it is isn't difficult. But it does, I suppose, the practice, I suppose, that to learn or to gain that confidence, to sustain that practice, to maintain it, and to keep an even flow of awareness, to simply observe and not be and nothing else, not buying into what we're experiencing, what we're seeing.
Yes. And
trusting that that's enough. And that's the amazing thing, because we struggle to have that confidence that that's enough, because we are obsessive interferers. We desperately want to interfere, because if we believe, if we're doing something, that it's got to be good, but actually doing's getting in the way.
But also, sometimes it seems to work very well that you can just stand back and let things go, and the thoughts don't really arise too much, and you feel that you've had a good session. And other times the thoughts are much more annoying and they get in the way, and then it's difficult. Yes. And
then but if we don't have preferences, we don't judge it like that. So you don't you notice that feeling of good and bad, but you don't believe it, you don't buy into it. And then it doesn't matter, good or bad, it doesn't matter, just sit.
Thank you very much. I really admire this doesn't matter approach of yours, and I think it's very very practical, very serious, and I must put it into practice. Yes, thank you, Martin.
Jude,
it's a really interesting discussion this evening, and your words really have triggered a lot of things off, I think, for perhaps quite a lot of us. I particularly liked your comparison with a parent, when you made that comparison with a wise, kind and loving parent who can observe and allow and not interfere about the over trousers or anything else, and just allow the growth. And I think, for me anyway, using the analogy with a parent somehow took it out of you and yours into something other. And I don't know, that I felt that was very powerful comparison, and very touching one as well, and a nice thing to try to model, but not in a grasping sort of way. But I just thought that was very, very striking, and thank you for the teaching this evening and the meditations. Lovely.
So just to take that analogy a little bit further, it's I think that we often identify with the parent. We often identify ourselves with the parent as the person, that inner voice that's telling us we should do this and shouldn't do that, and it should be like this and it shouldn't be like that, and we think there's a self in there and that's who we are. But that comes from the intellect, doesn't it? And the child, that's from the heart. And the child is that we also have a valid sense of self, that child in us, which deserves of space and needs to grow and develop. And we to nurture that child, then we need to let go of the critical voice of the parent that wants to interfere. And so then we have, in that kind of analogy, we've got like two selves. We've got the parent saying it should be like this, and we should be like this, and the child is just saying, it just wants it, just wants to be loved. And there isn't practice about that we need to learn. It's about developing that, nurturing that love in us and giving it the chance to blossom and grow. So that's what, and not letting the parent that knows better get in the way. So trusting in the inner, the love, the development of the heart, rather than believing in the intellect, is what I think is our practice is. And that's when Mark was talking about fear and courage, and letting in that little child into, and that it's often, we've suppressed through our lives. And so kind of, I feel like that it's we're returning to our chart, to that, or perhaps connecting with that child. And the funny thing is, and because you can do, I found that this through my own practice, that when I took that, when I worked backwards on that into my earlier experiences as a child, I actually connected with the moment of that moment when the world ceased to be innocent. I found that moment, and it was at that moment I could remember when my mother told me not to do that that thing. I wasn't allowed to get into bed any longer with her. She said, no, don't do that. When you do, you're too rough, and I don't want you to get into bed with me anymore. I used to get into bed in the mornings. Every morning when I get up, I'd come to bed with mum and dad. And I was told I couldn't do that anymore. And I could actually remember that happening. It kind of became, in my meditation, the feeling of that. And that painful feeling was incredibly painful. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That was the first moment of the world, of that loss of love, that loss of complete acceptance, realizing that love became conditional in that moment. I had to earn love, I had to deserve love, I had to do things to gain love, because what I was doing was not acceptable, and I couldn't be loved if I was too rough. I was, and that's interesting, isn't it? That moment of where you start, from that moment onwards in life, you start to try and manipulate the world to be loved, because but what you're trying to do is to get back to that feeling of love, unconditional love. And we can do that in our meditation practice. We can come back to that feeling of unconditional love and acceptance, because we can bring it into our own hearts. We don't need somebody else to do it, to love us unconditionally. We can find that within our own hearts. And that seems to me a kind of like the story of meditation practice. That's what happens.
Yeah, I thought what you said about the image of the child, that sense of wonder of a child in a garden where they can explore and they don't need to know the names of everything. That sense of wonder was extremely powerful, especially for me, because my earliest recollection is being in a garden and being in grass that was taller than I was, and having that wonderful sense of slight apprehension, but also great excitement and curiosity. So that image of a child in a garden is very, very striking. Thank you.
So I think that I better bring it to a close, and by sharing the screen, and there we are. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. I don't know if there's a program up, but I know that Ajahn Chandasiri is going to be giving a lot of teachings over this term, so that's something to look forward to.
Thank you very much, Martin. It was very nice teachings tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you.